welcome to The Big Debate. I'm Sikim Kabadeli. On the 100th anniversary of the 1913 Land Act, we are in Dudwarens, a small farming community in the Western Cape winelands. Dudwarens hit the headlines when protests by farm workers fed up with low wages turned violent. Just like thousands of farm workers across South Africa, workers here in Dudwarens work the land but don't own it. And our government has failed to return much land into black hands despite repeated promises. To our north in Zimbabwe, more radical land redistribution has been criticized for increasing poverty and hunger in that country. So do calls for accelerated land reform in South Africa threaten our future, or are we simply postponing the inevitable? Well, to debate this topic, I'm joined by Lichesa Tsinodi, who is a Deputy Minister of Rural Development and Land Reform, Beatrice Brink, a former farm worker and a leader of the Food Sovereignty Campaign, Theo Diaga, an agri-business owner and the Deputy President of Agri-SA, representing farmers from across the country. Ruth Hall is Associate Professor at the Institute for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies at the University of the Western Cape, and Andile Mngxitama, a land policy expert. In our audience here in Dudwarens are members of the farming communities from this area and as far afield as the Northern Cape. So before we start our debate on land reform, take a look at this overview.
In the largest farm workers' strike since the beginning of democracy, thousands of farm labourers marched through the streets of the small farming town of Dudwarens, torching buildings, farm equipment, vineyards and orchards in their trail. The workers' demands? A minimum wage of 150 a day and better working conditions. By the time the workers finally met their employers, damage to property totaled 200 million and at least 2 workers were dead. Sean and Tembelihle live in Stoffland, a squatter camp and reservoir of labour for the farms in Dudwarens. Participating in the strike cost them their jobs, but despite this, they refuse to be silenced and draw a link between the workers' strikes for better pay and government's failure to redistribute land.
It's about 18 years now we've been free from apartheid, and I believe that people are not benefiting from anything, from any resources or from any land. The money that they're giving us is not even close to what they are giving their babies to go and buy or enjoy for the weekend.
So what happened to the dream of changing land ownership in the new South Africa after centuries of colonization and apartheid, which left about 85% of land in the hands of the white minority? 100 years ago, the Native Land Act legislated the theft of land from Africans. Then when liberation movements met the government in the early 90s, it was agreed that private property rights would be protected in the constitution.
If the current government has a 2/3 majority, we still see that they don't try to change the property clause so that our people have access to land.
Government argues that following years of unrest during apartheid, there was no option but to protect the rights of landowners. It was either that or land grabs and possibly a civil war. 3 programs of land reform were set up to facilitate the redistribution of land ownership in an orderly and peaceful fashion. Firstly, land restitution allows people to lodge claims for stolen land, and yet some claims have been pending for more than a decade. Secondly, land tenure reform aims to make the lives of farm workers more secure, and yet 1 million farm workers have been forcefully removed from farms since 1994. Finally, land redistribution. It aims to make land available primarily for food production, but most farms redistributed to black farmers are no longer productive. As a result, government has missed its own target of redistributing 30% of land by 2014. To date, less than 8% has been redistributed. Commercial farmer interest groups such as Agri-West Cape say they are committed to land reform but are concerned about food security.
If we do land reform and we would like to have proper food security, then we need to make it work. Food security means that we will have a growing population, which will double up until 2030. So that'll mean that we will have to double up our food production.
Under the current system, dominated by a handful of commercial farmers, the country produces enough food to feed the nation. The irony is that farm workers are among the millions in the country who can't afford 3 meals a day. Faced with the reality of unemployment and food insecurity, iThemba Small Farmers Association decided to take matters into their own hands. In the late 90s, they occupied about 75 hectares of abandoned state-owned land and farmed on it, selling their produce and stock to the surrounding communities. Government has since taken them to court for their illegal land seizure.
What is the problem of government? They say Vukuzenzela, but if you do something, then you vacate the land.
We don't want to go the Zimbabwean way. We fear it too.
We are going to come to a point where we become like Zimbabwe. People are going to start to take the land by force.
Umhlaba wona ngowethu. Xa sesubanga ke ngoku izawuphinda ibenzima. Izawusokolisa abantu, kuzawuba nguphansi phezulu.
Lechesa Tsinori, Deputy Minister of Land Reform. You failed the people of Thembalethu. You say to people, Vukuzenzele, do things for yourself. That's what they've done. They've occupied the land.
Well, if you break the law, where things are supposed to be done legally, that is wrong.
The problem, Deputy Minister, is
Yes.
that we are sitting at the moment,
Yes.
8% of land has
Yes.
been handed over.
Yes.
At this rate, it's going to take you more than a century to give back half of the land that should be returned. There have been green papers, there have been plans, there have been acknowledgements.
Yes.
How long should people wait?
The problem with not doing it systematically is that we will rush into it and allow it to happen in a way that will not be sustainable. And we would like to move at the greatest speed possible. And the reason we have those things is to, in fact, ensure that once people get onto the land, they receive the support they deserve, because they are not going to be able to sustain those things without support.
Petrus, you're a farm worker leader, and the minister says you need to be patient.
The people of South Africa, the landless people, has been patient for years now. We have been in 18 years of democracy, and the government promised to move 30% of land back to the landless people at 2014. But up till now, as we know, only 5% of land has been transferred to the landless people. And I also hear that the minister said that if people breaks the law, I don't know what law is the minister referring to, because the Native Land Act was written in June, during June, and it will be 100 years since our people has been dispossessed from our land. So if the minister said we break the law, it is actually wrong to say that South African citizens are breaking the law.
It's in the Constitution, Petrus. It's in the
This land
Constitution.
was stolen from us. And the apartheid government, they write the laws, to move the land away from the indigenous people. They give our land to the people that come from Europe in those days. So the government has the responsibility to write new laws that make it possible for our people to have our land back.
Okay, sir, Minister?
That's exactly what we are preparing legislation for. The problem with the occupation of land, we had to go to court the other day to remove people from land they occupied because that land was returned to their owners. So other people then come and occupy it. This is the problem that happens when people occupy land illegally, in that sense, that they've successfully gotten their land back and then people go and occupy it. This is the problem when it happens unsystematically. We want to create an effective system for people to access land, and when they do, they must get support.
Angela, the minister does have a point. I mean, we can't just go the lawless route and just take what we think we want. What if poor people went and demanded that government goes and takes your house and your car to give it to somebody more deserving?
The same party has been in power saying exactly the same thing every time. Why should we believe that this minister is going to change anything? The idea that we must respect unjust laws is evil, basic.
But do two wrongs make a right?
No, we are correcting any historical injustice. Now, the government clearly has failed and is not willing to do so. And people are therefore taking steps to correct this historical injustice. Everybody knows land was stolen, taken by force, by violence, by those who have it today.
What Angela has said, you've heard what Petrus have said. As an agribusiness owner, how does this make you feel when you listen to this? Because they're saying there's a historic injustice that needs to be corrected.
No, that's not what they are saying. They are saying that farmers who are currently on their land have stolen that land. Now I wonder why they didn't take the matter to the police. There are legislation in place, there are systems in place. The minister is right. We need to follow due process, or we will put this land in the kind of chaos which we have seen in Zimbabwe.
Willing buyer, willing seller failed.
The willing seller principle has not failed. It's the buyer that has failed. The willing seller principle means the Constitution allows for expropriation for a public purpose. And there is an Expropriation Act in place. If you follow due process and if there is a valid claim on land, then you can expropriate. Government has not done it up to now because the expropriation has to be done on the willing seller principle. That's the only measurement for value. What is at the core of this debate is whether there should be market-related compensation when land is transferred or not. That is what it is actually about.
And we will talk about that, but let's talk about expropriation, Minister, because even Theo says, why is it that you're not expropriating?
The Constitution says that we expropriate as a last resort. Then the reason we would want to use says we must study the history of the acquisition of the land and use that amongst others, not only the market value. That's the criticism that we accept, that we have overemphasized the market when there are other considerations that we should be making.
If expropriation is a last resort, as you say, then why don't you buy more land? Are you putting enough cash into this?
No, it's the cost. It's too enormous. It's too huge. This is why in the plan, in the proposed plan, National Development Plan, we are saying the costs must be shared across by all key stakeholders in the process. And we are suggesting 50%. But that's a proposal, that's a model. I mean, if we were to finish all the research on every claim, for example, we would not have the money if we were to go the sort of prices that we are getting. And this is why the Valuer General is critical to improve the valuation of land, because often some of it is inflated for a variety of factors.
Ruth Hall, help us out here. What is it? Is it a moral, historical injustice? Is it an economic issue? Is it political will? Why are we just not making headway?
Clearly, this is an unresolved historical grievance. And I think that we've heard that just in terms of how the audience has responded. But I feel that a deep irony is that a lot of the concessions that the ANC fought for in the context of our political transition, it has chosen not to use those powers, the powers to expropriate, to pay compensation other than market value. So for some reason, the concessions that were fought very hard for have not really been used. But I think it is an economic issue. I think that it's easy just to say, well, we just need to do more land reform. There's something else at stake here that has not been clarified, and that is, while we have been going very slowly along the road of land reform, a very profound shift has happened that is anti-poor in South Africa, and that is we've globalized our agricultural sector, we have liberalized our economy, and now people, farm workers in places like Durance where we are today, are affected not only by the fact that there are workers in a commercial farm, but they're subject to the vagaries of global capitalism. So I think that the big question that we haven't resolved, and that the ANC has not resolved, Minister, is what is the alternative vision? Are we just going to take commercial farms and transfer them from one white owner to one black owner? Because that's primarily what is happening under the current proactive land acquisition strategy. Or are we going to break them up?
Let's talk about what that vision is. I mean, if you had to address the people of the Dorans who are sitting with us in this room, what is it? Is it land or is it money in their pockets?
She's right at the macro level. That the nature of the positions that were adopted in the past created the current economic problems that we're confronting. It's the chickens coming home to roost. And so part of the call for a shift towards a smallholder farm, for example, support, so that you do not overemphasize the commercial part of it whilst you support it. It's a crucial part of the shift that she's talking about we need to go into. That's what we are moving towards. In other words, there's recognition that without providing critical support in that area, we will not be able to go that route.
The people in this room,
yes,
they don't want you here, you passing the buck to the global economy.
No.
Yes, it has an impact, but right now,
yes,
they were asking to move from 69 Rand a day to 150 Rand a day,
yes,
because they simply cannot afford to eat. Yes. What do you say to them?
You see, that is the relationship on the farm. Why is it being passed on to the government?
Theo? Minister, wait. Theo?
No, let me answer.
I will let you finish. I will let you finish that point.
Yes, let me finish.
I do need to ask him that question because
yes.
people are asking possibly that question. And how would you respond to the minister?
70 Rand a day on a farm is pretty little. Every farmer would acknowledge that. But that is what is affordable. 6 years ago, we still had a thriving tea industry in South Africa. And we produced a lot of the coffee we consume ourselves. But we could simply not compete with the labor input in Malawi, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and today, we don't make one bag of tea in this country. The labor-intensive stuff, like tomatoes, baby vegetables, export fruit for that matter, is simply going to crawl across our borders. And we are going to lose their jobs if the jobs are not market related. And that is what farmers can afford. And many of our members in Agri-SA who are successful beneficiaries of land reform, they are suffer for exactly that reason. There's not enough profit, and the land which they got becomes poverty traps. If you cannot farm profitably, you cannot farm.
Angela, he's got a point, but it is a hard pill to swallow, but there's a point.
Everybody on earth, by the way, protects their agricultural sector. The biggest thing that they fight in America and the Europeans in the World Trade Organization is protection of the agricultural economy. Our government does not do that. That's the first thing. But what will they be protecting? Slavery. This is the point. The key point here is the agricultural sector in South Africa is based on slavery. And the ANC government has legislated that slavery. This is the problem that you see in the Durance. So before we can talk about wages, let us go first to address the land question. Let farm workers have their own land when they can make a choice whether I want to work for that guy or not. And by the way, Siki, we shall not wish. By the way, it is the idea that we must buy our land. Willing buyer. This man says must buy our land, stolen land. This we shall not do. There is no business in I bet or stolen land.
When we return, we ask whether South Africa might actually benefit from a Zimbabwe-style land reform program. You're watching The Big Debate.
This assumption that there's a link between successful commercial farming and food security is something we really have to get rid of. A successful commercial farm does not necessarily contribute to food security. We're here in a wine growing area. What does wine do for our food security? Theo de Jager is busy with forestry. They don't make their decisions based on our food security. They make it based on profit.
White people, when they came here, they came with the dromedaries, Rachel and Hudewu. And those vessels, they never carried any land. And it's so funny that you even protect them.
Yes.
What are you doing?
Yes.
What impression do you give to your people? Why are you killing your people, bruh?
Meneer ek wil maar net vir u vra. U het net toe gesê mense kry R70 'n dag en dit is genoeg vir hulle. As u daai R70 elke maand teen die einde van die maand gaan u oorleef. En ons mense kry nie R70 'n dag nie. Hulle kry R55 'n dag in die Rossendal area. Asseblief u moet u se feite reg hê.
A free for all is not going to benefit anybody. It's going to be to the detriment of every single person, including the people who get land.
Welcome back to the big debate on land taking place here in the Dorans in the Western Cape. Now, land reform in Zimbabwe has been criticized across the world for turning that country from a bread basket to a basket case. But is that the full story? Recently, some South Africans have called for a more radical Zimbabwe-style land reform program in this country. Would that be a good idea? And Theo, a good question for you. What is exactly your concern about Zimbabwe-style land reform program, particularly when it comes to food security?
My family is still in Zimbabwe. They no longer farm there. But we have seen how that currency has lost 99% of its value, how runaway inflation has really impoverished people, how they had to run across the border to work in South Africa. Many of them today work on our farms. Although they are pretty well trained, Zimbabwe did something right with education. And yet, nothing could save that economy. And today, the agricultural production output is so much down. And I know that with PLAS, they had recently put a paper out where they feel that Zimbabwe has actually accomplished something with improved production output. But it is not a fraction from what it used to be in the days when Zimbabwe was still the envy of the world's cattle industry. Should something like that happen in South Africa, there is no future for any one of us. Zimbabwe today has nothing to be proud of.
Ben Cousins, would you agree that Zimbabwe is a basket case? You've been looking at some studies that seem to show a different picture.
There's accumulating evidence that land reform in Zimbabwe is not a disaster. Particularly on the small-scale A1 farms, production is going up. In some crops, production has exceeded that which it was before 2000. For example, cotton is 130% of what it was before. Groundnuts are up. Sorghum is up. Tobacco has been increasing in recent years. It's up to 70% of what it used to be. Maize production is 30% down on what it was in the 1990s. That's partly because of shortages of inputs and partly because of drought. So yes, there have been real positives. There were negatives as well. For example, some large-scale commercial farming crops have declined. For example, horticulture. Yeah. And foreign exchange isn't being earned at the same extent it was before. There were human rights abuses. There was disinvestment. But the decline of the Zimbabwean economy is not due solely to land reform. And the key lesson for South Africa is that we must get the benefits of land reform without the costs, which the Zimbabwe situation.
Which is the Zimbabwe. Andile, you've said in the past that if you were given a farm, you probably wouldn't farm it. So I've got to ask the question, because there is the point about food security. So we give you a farm, you sit on it, or we give people farms and they don't actually farm. Who's going to produce our food?
In fact, the biggest positive is not the economic that the Professor Kazan has mentioned. It is the fact that 4,000 white people owned 80% of Zimbabwe. That has changed. Now we have more than 300,000 families sitting on that land. It means the Zimbabwean people have returned their country back to them, and they have that what we can call real freedom. This is the biggest benefit of that land reform process.
But the people he's talking about are farming. I'm asking about those people in South Africa who don't not necessarily want to own a farm.
No, absolutely. The point is to understand what you're doing with land reform. You're not giving land necessarily just for economic reason. You are addressing a historical injustice. When they stole our land, by the way, here, they were not saying, oh, we're taking your land because you're being unproductive. They destroyed the productive systems of our people. So we want that land back.
But we still need to eat. Let's address my question, because you need to eat, I need to eat.
No, absolutely. By the way, from Zimbabwe, we know you give people land. Already they'll start producing, but you must do something else. Our government is totally failing. Support the people on land, otherwise you're setting up for failure. That's what you need to do.
Theo, I have to ask you this question on food security. Absolutely a very important issue. But food security for whom? Because if you go to Woolies and you go to Pick and Pay, those shelves are full. But some of the people in this room cannot afford to go to Woolies and go to Pick and Pay. Shouldn't we be putting money in their pockets so that they can go and buy and access the food at Pick and Pay and Woolies, or land then to grow the food?
Food security does not mean that you need to produce everything you consume, or for that matter, consume everything you produce. It means that you produce enough of that in which you have a competitive advantage, so that there is money available to buy that which you cannot competitively produce, there's a distinction must be made between household food security, with which we have a problem in certain areas of South Africa, and national food security. And let's be very clear about this. In a country where more and more people every day are dependent on food from shelves, there is no way you can provide through smallholder farming. There you need massive scale, large scale farming to produce for that. But yes, where people live in rural areas, there should be opportunities. And there must be, like in the rest of Africa and in the rest of the Southern Hemisphere, where people can produce for themselves. But they will never be able to produce everything they need for themselves.
Beatrice, it's a bit romantic, right, to think that everybody can go and produce food, right? So if the minister took Theo's land and gave it to you, what guarantee do we have that you're actually not going to mess it up?
I don't think we can give guarantees, because in many instances we have that government has done small minorities of land reform, where they have given land to people, but they have never built the capacity of the people and make sure that those people have resources, as the white commercial farmers have.
Let me ask the people in the room. If the minister were to take the farms and give them over to you, what are you going to do with them? Are you going to farm? Who wants to talk to me? I'm going to go up there.
I'm one of the farm owners of Itemba, which means hope. We've got about 175 farmers on that farm. Nobody's assisting us. We are doing our own farming. We don't get any help from the government. The government even come there and cut our water, so we can't supply water to our animals, but we're still farming. The minister here does not know what he's talking about. We are farming on the white man's farm. Why can't we? And we're still farming on our own land. Although we took that land, we took it by force because we got no other alternative. Currently, we are supplying in the Western Cape, in Easter River, we're supplying the people in that area with food from our farms. And we're farming on 60 by 35 meters of land, and we're 175 farmers there, and we are making a success, although we're struggling.
Minister, again, the Vuk'uzenzele spirit we were talking about, they're doing it on their own without support.
Assuming we wanted to support them, let's say we had to support them, how would we use the basis for supporting them if we required the money we have now, the recapitalization and development program that we have? We have over 400 farms that we are supporting as we speak today. All right, and all over the country, sir. All over the country, and no, hang on.
Let's give the minister a chance to finish the statement. No. If he can't finish the statement, then we can't respond to him. Everyone in the room will get a chance.
To be able to support them, which is what we would like to do, we would have to regularize that first.
Okay. But if you had gotten the land to them,
do you see the problem
and not
that
sitting at 8%.
In other words, he says they occupied it by force. So if we go and support that, so we have to know what we are saying is that if it is not legal as we speak now, it is not.
Just give the minister a chance to respond, please. Otherwise, this is going to deteriorate. Minister, how are we going to resolve it then? Because as you can see, people are saying enough is enough. We want to do this. What do you think we need to do?
What we need to do is very clear. It's very clear. You see, there's a whole range of opportunities. The point I was trying to make earlier on is that there's a lot of things, both that business, labor, in other words, workers themselves, showing initiative, creating, identifying opportunities for us to go in to support those initiatives. The point we are making is that in instances where people take it by force, unfortunately, government operates by law.
Okay. Ruth, let me ask you this question, because you mentioned a very important word a little bit earlier, and that was there's a lot of emotion in this debate. It makes it very difficult to actually do what you were saying a little bit earlier, and that's look at the key problems.
Well, I think that there have been different problems over time, and we're talking about land reform as if it's all one thing and we agree what it looks like. In fact, we've had 3 quite different land reform programs since '94. In the first 5 years, we had a program that was for the poor, It was only for the poor, and the aim was to give people a place that they could call their own. But in the second period, from 2000 or so onwards under Mbeki, there was a new land reform program which was focused on black economic empowerment, and the aim there was to create black capitalist farmers to work alongside the white commercial farming class. And this was a model of course, is a more attractive model for white commercial farmers who want black counterparts. But it doesn't address the kinds of concerns that have been expressed by many of the workers in this room, because essentially the farm owner changes, but the same labour conditions continue in its place. And in the third period, since about 2006, we've had a proactive land acquisition strategy where the state is now buying the land itself. And this, I think, is very important, because this example has shown us that when the state is the owner, it is not always going to act in the best interests of the poor. In this case, the state as a landlord is protecting its own property rights against people who would like to use that land. So now we see the state buying whole commercial farms and making them available on lease to black commercial farmers. So even if we do more land reform, even if we were to meet the 30% target, even if we were to achieve all of those targets, would it change the situation of many people here? I think not. So that's why I think that we need to draw our attention to a very crucial issue which goes beyond race. And it's a question of what is the class agenda of land reform.
Is there a trade-off here, Minister? What do you want to do? Do you want to create black capitalist, commercial farmers on the one hand, or do you want to help the poor? What do you want to do exactly? It goes back to the vision.
No, our responsibility is to the majority of the people in this country, and most of them are poor. And the reality is that what she's talking about, the very change that we are introducing, is intended precisely to ensure that we are able to help the poor.
All right. When we return, we look at a farm here in the Cape where the farmer has decided to share his land with his workers. You're watching The Big Debate.
For seventh-generation landowner Mark Solms, the history of land ownership is at the heart of this debate. The Solms Museum van der Kaap is one of many projects aimed at preserving this history for the benefit of his workers, many of whom are direct descendants of slaves who once worked this very land. But for Solms, this was not enough. He and a neighboring farmer went as far as putting their farms up as collateral in order for their employees to afford a loan to buy an adjacent farm which now forms part of Solms Delta. Profits are divided equally between the three partners. Even before this, staff members enjoyed benefits such as DSTV in their quarters, free Model C education for their children, free medical care, and transport.
I think, to be honest, that there's an element of fear and guilt on all of us landowners' part. Maybe not all of us are willing to admit it. But I think when you face up to the history of what happened in this country, of how the land came to be in the possession of the privileged white elite that it is in the possession of, there's just no two ways about it. If we don't put it right ourselves, it eventually will be imposed on us in a way that will be far worse.
Welcome back to The Big Debate here in the Dorans in the Western Cape. In fact, we have the CEO of Solms Delta here with us. Craig, thank you for being with us today. How does that example differ from the usual share ownership schemes that we see?
Thanks, it's great to be here. I think the main difference really is what Mark started on the farm together with Richard Astor as his partner later, was just to take responsibility themselves without any form of outside support other than commercial funding, which they secured themselves, and to just cut across, from a practical perspective, all this red tape and just make sure that they put in place a structure that allowed for joint ownership between the three parties, which was the two of them, together with the trust representing our disadvantaged workers and the residents as well. And then making sure that all the changes that we implemented on the program, we started before we became profitable, and facilitating funding for that, again, off our own bat. We've had very little outside funding. I think the main thing is just to make it happen yourself.
This sounds good to me. The workers have, their kids have good education, they've got quality health care, they have DSTV.
I just heard somebody in the audience saying that that's a huyelani, like some sort of a nice master. The point is this: We can't have a land reform process based on charity, goodwill, few farmers, when they want, when they feel like they will be good to their people. No. It cannot be based on this. It is a national responsibility of this government to do it, not to punish anyone.
But Andile, you're criticizing everything. Everything is not good enough. Here is somebody who's trying to do something. They own that farm. The bond is in both of their names. If that thing does not work out, everybody, including the farm owner, is going to suffer along with the worker.
This is not a model that can be followed. This is not a pilot that can be followed at all. It's not going to work. If you think about it,
give him a chance.
If you think about,
let's give him a chance. Let's give him a.
The problem is that you have slave masters like yourself, who now we say we must surrender a land reform program to slave. No, but listen, you see, that's the problem. Here in the Durance, you can't afford to pay farm workers a little bit to live, and you say we must surrender land reform program. By the way, let's go back to what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with a property that you have no right to. This is stolen property. This is number one. This is number one. Number two, we can't have a reform process based on charity. This is an insult to our people because this is our land. Our government, unfortunately, this government will not do it. And so people like Mark, of course, it's a good thing to hear and there. You know, we're doing good. We're taking care of our children and our workers and so on. But this is not real dignity for a people. We want to feel as citizens here, not dependent on the goodwill of these guys.
You are trying to tell us that the Zimbabwean model is successful. Yes. So why is it that most of the Zimbabwean people doesn't stay in Zimbabwe and has to work outside of Zimbabwe if that model is so successful? Thank you.
Fair enough. Andile, we can give Andile a chance to respond. Andile?
No, but this is very interesting. You know, the Zimbabwean economy was attacked by outsiders, by the white world, as soon as Mugabe and ZANU-PF redistributed land. The economic crisis, not of the making of Zimbabwe, it was made by global forces in defense of white people. That's what happened with the Zimbabwean economy, right? So, but now we know, like Professor Ben-Carson is telling us, things have changed in Zimbabwe. And the good thing is this. Zimbabwean people own their country. Here we starve, and black people starve here, and there's no crisis.
But Andile, fair enough, but let's not forget that Mugabe did commit human rights abuses.
Look, there were problems in Zimbabwe, big problems. There were big problems in Zimbabwe, but these problems were not just the creation of Mugabe. What will you do in your country when you return land? You find yourself that your currency is under attack, your economy is under attack, sanctions are being brought. Basically, Zimbabwe, the white world wants Zimbabwe to fail. Because if it succeeds, then black people everywhere will say, we want land so that we can live like free people.
We're heading towards a Zimbabwe situation, aren't we?
Not necessarily. We shouldn't be going that route. We will do it, by the way. The government will do it. And
when are you going to do it is the question from the room.
It is important the government has to play a critical role in facilitating access to land by the majority of people in this country. And this is one message the ANC has made it clear to them. There is no question. We are already in the process in consultation, not only with farmers, with farm workers, but we are also every morning, Siki, demonstrating, showing instances of success on the ground that involved poor people who are back on their land.
When we return, we're going to hear the last word from our panel and our audience. You're watching The Big Debate. Welcome back to the Dwarens in the Western Cape and to The Big Debate on land. Now, does land reform threaten our future? What do you think? Well, let's hear a final word from our audience, and then we'll hear from our panel.
To the people of this area, what needs to happen for all of you? You need to be willing to die in order to change things for this country.
This is really a big debate, and I'm hearing all sorts of things. We're hearing people want land, people want productive land, people want higher salaries, people want all sorts of things. We're 51 million people in this country, and if every individual wants something different, we're never going to get any progress on land reform.
Deputy Minister, I say now in this audience, if we are not going to get land by next year, this land going to be like Zimbabwe, because we are suffering, we are suffering, we are suffering.
Augustus maand 1947 word my oupa van sy grond af kom sit. Op daai stadium boer my oupa met 200 skape wat in daai tyd 'n baie goeie vooruitstrevende boer was. En hy het diefstal. Dames en here, hy skryf 'n destydse brief aan die destydse departement van lande hier in Kaapstad. En hulle sê meneer Steenkamp, ons kan niks aan jou saak doen. 'n Paar dae daarna, dames en here, sterf hy aan 'n hartaanval. Oor daai pyn my hart vandag nog.
We are sitting and we are failing on this piece of land because commercial agriculture are taking all the water, you see. But the government don't want to listen. They are so arrogant because they are part of capitalists in this country and they support the capitalist system. Thank you very much.
Minister, I'm born in the Dorings.
Yes, you are from the Dorings.
I'm a councillor in the Dorings.
Yes.
And I'm also the chairperson of the Boland ANC in this region. Before the 1913 Land Act, it was free for all. Yes. The land was grabbed by the whites, Mugabean style. Mugabean style. Yes. Now, it's wrong now to reclaim our land Mugabean style, Minister.
100 years ago, people signed 99-year leases, and the government of today renewed it in Stellenbosch. We got record of it. We want that to be investigated. Mr. Minister, can you go back to your books, to all farms that was given 100 years ago, and give it back to the people it belonged to?
I think let's get a final response, final comments from the panel. Emotions are running high. I'll start with you, Petrus.
We know that the land reform process has failed us. And we also know, we have to admit, that Agri-SA and all the agri-businesses and the affiliates are never going to give up. They already indicated that they are not going to pay the 150 rand per day to farm workers. So we have to organize our workers. We have to organize ourselves. We have to build the mesh. And we have to take this land, whatever the cost will be. Still, the Jager have to go back to his constituency and to tell them that we are organizing the people, because your farms are not returning value to our people. It's only returning the value to your greedy white commercial farmers of South Africa and to the corrupt government of South Africa. So we are organizing our people. We'll take the farms back, whatever the costs are.
Can we go to Ruth? Ruth, your final comments?
Siki, I find it deeply sad that 18, 19 years after democracy, this is such a deeply polarized issue. And in fact, it's incredible that, if anything, we have moved backwards in the past few years in terms of building a consensus about the way forward. Clearly, the process is too slow. That seems to be the only thing on which there's wide agreement. But also, we know that the implementation, support for people getting land has been of such poor quality that it's actually undermined the argument in favor of land reform. And critics of the process have been quick to point out that, therefore, any further land reform is at a cost to the country as a whole. And I think that this is deeply problematic. The government knows, it has done its own research, it knows what the problems are. These are remediable problems. There are examples of things working well, but land reform is never going to work by itself. And the question that I think we need to come back to is, politically, why do we allow continued failure on this issue?
Andile?
It's actually very sad and disappointing that, we're sitting here now, 100 years later, after land has been taken from our people, and a minister here is promising us more things. There are farmers here, black farmers, who are telling us in this house, We have had to move into this land. We are producing successfully, but our government is the one that is fighting us, taking us to court and removing us from land. Shouldn't it be actually a good gesture from this government here now to say, as a responsible government, we will not remove these people. We will support them. That's the first thing you do. The second thing you do, this government, is to say, no more eviction on farms. As a gesture of these 100 years, because you can't understand South Africa without understanding the land question. And this 100 years now tells us exactly where we are. But this government is not going to do that. We have to end the racist white commercial farms. Farming in this country is bad for our people, is bad for workers, is bad for environment.
Theo, your final word?
I think the biggest imperative for our nation is not the elevation of poverty. It's growing our economy to have a sound basis from which we can eradicate poverty. I think the biggest debate is not a debate between black and white like the fundamental racists would have it. Neither between rich and poor as the socialists would have it, or between employer and employee as the unions would have it. The biggest debate is between those who are committed to change within the ambit of the law and the Constitution, and the masters of chaos and destruction, who has never been on the production side of the economy and has never created anything, least of all a job.
Final word, Minister.
We have now completed a land audit in the country. What is owned by the state and privately owned. One of the reasons why that is a very crucial part of the work that we want to do is to enable us to fast track some of the policies that are emerging, that are in the making. We are amending a series of legislation, including that which involves evictions of people on farms, and to create mechanisms that will be agile and operate swiftly to protect people's rights on the land. We are increasingly focusing on the institutions that will provide support, money that is going to support people on the farms who have got it back is increasing, and we are increasing our monitoring and evaluation. At the end of the day, there is no question about the necessity to undo poverty as it is expressed in this area, but blatant inequality. There's no question about that. It stares us in the face, and we can't pussyfooty around it, and we have to address it urgently.
And the gesture that Angela Motama was going for?
No, we don't make those decisions in platforms like this, that way. We don't do that, yeah.
We'll leave it there.
He knows that, yeah.
Well, there's no doubt that unless we address the poverty and inequality in our rural areas, South Africa has a bleak future. The fruits of the land must be shared equally by all South Africans in a way that sets right our history. Does land reform threaten our future, or is it the failure to redistribute land that is taking us closer to our Zimbabwe moment? You decide. Thank you for watching The Big Debate.